Okay, so we're good to go. So welcome everybody to this, one of the many events that are being put on this week as part of the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, which I think everybody is well aware of at this stage. And there's many other events, and many of the events that have already happened are available online and can be looked at. My name is Paul O'Connor from the Pat Finucane Centre here in Derry. And we're very pleased to co-sponsor this event with the Bloody Sunday Trust. We will begin by introducing our speakers and talking to them about the incredibly important work of the Irish Network Against Unity. And then, I suppose, towards the latter half, we will invite people to submit questions via chat for our participants. And I think we'll start obviously with Shane O'Curry, who's known to some people in this parish, who has links here to the Northwest that I think he'll be talking about. And also we're proud to have Patricia Munatsi and MariaElena Costa Sa, also from the Irish Network Against Racism, and Nedson. There were particular issues about participation in this event for our visitors, our friends that are based in Dublin. And I think maybe we should start with that. Shane, as director, maybe you could share with our audience what those difficulties were just facing us today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. It's great to be here, and it's great to be here with old friends and old colleagues, and to be here with my new colleagues. And I love this idea of being able to bring us together. Unfortunately, we're not able to be there in person, partly because even today, Nedson hasn't got his passport back from the British Embassy in Dublin. You know, almost 2 months ago, we got an invitation from the Pat Finucane Centre to come and attend this event. And because Nedson is a Malawian national who has, you know, he's fully and appropriately documented for the 26 counties for the Republic of Ireland, but because of UK law, because of the border regime, because of British policy in the north, there is a requirement on him to apply for a special visa, even for a 1 or 2 day visit to visit projects and to people and to commemorate Bloody Sunday in the north. And so we thought that it would be cautious and responsible for us to apply for a visa. We didn't want to risk Nedson getting deported or anything unsavory happening to him. And so we applied for the visa. And as I say, we applied 6 weeks ago. 1 calendar month ago, we got acknowledgement from the British Embassy's visa office that they had received the visa and that it would issue within the next 15 days. And he has heard nothing back from them. And now he can't get through on the phone. There is a special phone line that he can take, and I think but they charge you £6 a minute. There's an email, you can make email inquiries, but they also charge. So it's a trap. And so because of that, we're not able to be there in person. And we think that that's a great pity. And we think it's indicative of the systemic racism that a border regime imposes on people who are here and who want to come and visit. So I suppose that's, from the outset, that's a thing. Yeah. And also, it was just something that I discussed briefly with Nedson before we came on here. So I just want to acknowledge and thank Nedson for that. And he might want to say a thing or two about that himself.
Yeah, we'll return to that. That's, I think for a lot of people here, would be quite shocked to hear that process just dragged on and had no positive outcome. I think I probably also share the views of a lot of people. I find it wrong that a British embassy determines who travels where on this island. You know, I think that's absolutely shocking. But needless to say, we'll move on. Shane, you have some, you're now director of the Irish Network Against Racism, an organisation for which I think we have a lot of respect. You have some experience up here in the Northwest. Maybe you'd like to share your roots of your prior experience with our good selves.
Yeah, so I was, I've been living in, I lived in Derry from 1996 until 2010, or Derry and the area around Derry. And I was finishing my degree in Derry in 1996 when the Drumcree riots happened, or the post-Drumcree riots in Derry happened in July 1996, and I was witness to them. And I was witness to the police tactics and police brutality and the brutalization of the community and the community anger in response to that. And I was shocked to hear the BBC carrying an RUC narrative verbatim, unchallenged. That, you know, so in other words, that a police version of events was unchallenged, when the reality that I had seen and that I was hearing from people was radically different. And the Pat Finucane Centre put out a call for people to take witness statements so that a report of these things could happen. And I volunteered and took a number of witness statements, and then in the weeks that followed sat with other volunteers in the Pat Finucane Centre, and we compiled a report which eventually became the report known as One Day in August, which very successfully challenged the dominant narrative. And it was just the elegant and simple beauty of that, of using people's own words, their first-hand testimonies, to challenge dominant narratives, that really got me hooked. And I think everything I did, you know, and I increasingly volunteered for the Pat Finucane Centre, and then eventually became an employee of the Pat Finucane Centre, working there. And it was just that this was the hook for me, was that you should use people's own experiences and narratives in their own words to challenge dominant narratives, and that it could be done, and so effectively. And there's a lot of skills and other things that that sort of flow from that you know, that necessitates, and those are things that I've been thinking about ever since, and those are things that I've had conversations with various colleagues about, including the colleagues present here. And the work that they do really all speaks to those conversations and to that very simple, beautiful principle of listening to people who are affected by forms of violence and discrimination, and foregrounding those experiences and their own words and experience to challenge dominant narratives and to change things and to change policies. So that was the hook. Yeah.
So at that stage you carried on documenting sectarian and racist attacks here in the north, which wasn't being done at the time. And now, obviously, one of the roles of INAR is to document racist attacks. And I was intrigued on your website. You offer people various methods to do that, and you offer people an online video, for instance, of how to detect racism and how to deal with racist incidents, which I thought was really innovative and incredible. On the website, it talks about a network of groups that feed information back to you, if I have understood that correctly, a network of some 40 groups around Ireland. Would any one of you, you know, from INAR want to explain that, maybe a bit of the backdrop to our audience? Patricia, would you like to follow that one up? I suppose for people that aren't really well aware of what it is that the network does, of how that network functions. You're muted at the moment. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. At the Irish Network Against Racism, we work with, we are a network organization of over 162 organizations that work in the human rights field. So what we do is we work in collaboration with our network members, sort of empower individuals, particularly from minority ethnic groups, to be able to advocate for themselves, and, you know, to empower them to take the different conversations around racism and racial discrimination in the civic space, and obviously to contribute in terms of different policy initiatives and policy discussions around combating racism. We also have a platform, the iReport, where individuals, not just victims, are able to report racist incidences. So as a bystander, as a third party witnessing racism, you can also go to our iReport platform, which is at www.ireport.ie, where you can report the instances. It is very easy to use. It's user-friendly. You can just report the incidences, and then we collect the different incidences and turn them into our annual report, which we use at the Irish Network Against Racism, for advocacy purposes. I know that there's the discussion that when we get into different spaces and talk about racism, the existence of racism in Ireland, there are people that say in different political issues that say racism doesn't exist. Where is the data? So this is where the iReport is absolutely important, because then it showcases that racism is real. Racism existed in Ireland, and these are the numbers. So data collection is key in terms of that, and it comes in form of the different reports that come on the iReport platform. So it's absolutely a key, and we use that for to advocate for policy changes with the Irish government. So yeah, absolutely, that's what I would say. Yeah.
And so would your monthly reports be fed back to authorities at various levels within government and statutory bodies?
Yes, absolutely. For instance, now that we are working on the National Action Plan against racism, and at the Irish Network, we are also developing a shadow report. So definitely these reports would be something that we use in the different platforms that we go to in discussions in terms of combating racism with different government ministries. So yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I had a brief chat with Shane about this, one of the issues, which is the title of today's event. And I think somewhere in the title it talks about the growth of far-right far-right groups in Ireland and the dangers that they pose. Shane had a particular take on it. Maybe we'll move back to that. But I was wondering from our other participants, I think, Shane, you suggested that you think actually there is not a growth as such. They may be more visible, but there's not a growth, but rather because of some of the excellent anti-racist work that's going on, they're getting exposed for who they are. I mean, MariaElena, in your experience, do you, particularly over the last couple of years, of a very unusual situation we've been in, we've seen far-right groups sometimes latch on to the anti-vaccination protests and so on. I mean, from your perspective, I don't actually know where you live, but and we don't need to know where you live, but have you seen an increase in incidents, or do you think that there's very effective work being done? Both could be true.
Well, true, actually. I guess growing up in the UK, I would have an understanding of far-right activity and the growth of the far-right. I'm happy to say that she's absolutely right. The far-right hasn't so far gained a foothold in Ireland in the same way that it has in other countries. But it is trying to mobilise, and we can see that through its links and its attempts to latch onto particular people who then, again, as you say, around anti-vaccination, may have taken platforms and come up with populist information around there. There's the Gemma Dohertys, the Dolores Hills, all of whom do kind of use social media as a platform to propagate some kind of far-right views. But I mean, it is really important that there is an observation of things. There are mechanisms that actually allow people to report far-right activity. It does happen, and we are increasingly hearing of incidents as well. And I think that's where it goes, like the whole notion of the iReport and the ability to use that mechanism to inform the state of what's actually happening is so important. So yeah.
And the mechanism for reporting that would be in the iReport, would be your website. That's where people should actually go there and report that.
It is. It's a very, very easy, accessible mechanism, and it shows how to do it on the website. And it's been interesting to see what people do and don't report. But I mean, what I'm also interested in is the notion of the iReport really being the mechanism by which you see that community mobilization. I think the iReport is almost a result of people becoming community activists and actually understanding it's less. It's true that people do come together and they do, like, people do report individual incidents, but where it's most useful is when we've done that community work and we've worked with, say, the Roma community, the traveller community, to actually explain to them why it's important to go to use things like the iReport as reporting. I think, yeah, those are the links that I was, when I was looking at the Pat Finucane Centre, and that ability to mobilise a community to tell what's happening on the ground, the facts.
To tell their story. Absolutely. Yeah. Shane, do you want to come in at this point? I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I always want to speak, so I better watch it. Yeah, so that the iReport, I suppose the iReport system, the way it was conceived was to remove as many barriers as possible between people's narratives about what's happened to them and getting them to the public, right? So it was so the idea is it's self-report, or somebody can support you, or an ally can write on your behalf, or somebody can. A witness can also write it, and the idea is to capture and be very transparent about your methodology, but to say, look, these are the patterns that we're seeing again and again, and from that we used to publish our reports 3 monthly, and then we moved to 6 monthly, and now we've moved to annual reports, but it's the same, and it's basically just because there's so much work in analyzing the data, and your data is more reliable over a 12-month period. But we've had consistent data for the last 8 years, which really shows that our methodology is robust. And we have used these to, so we've submitted very robust reports to the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland, to the Policing Authority, to the Houses of the Oireachtas. We've brought our data to UN CERD, to the OSCE, which monitors comparative hate crime data across different countries. So we've been able to use it, and as MariaElena says, it's also there's a community development piece to it as well, and a mobilization piece to it. That we encourage people to use the data creatively, to use it to self-advocate, and to use their own data gathered locally to advocate locally with it as well. And that's the vision. And our vision, of course, is that there will be more and more analysts and advocates of the iReport system who are themselves from minority ethnic backgrounds, and who will be able to produce reports with which they can directly advocate for policy change at a national and a local level as well. Just on the far right, I think the far right in Ireland, I think, had a breakthrough. Their biggest breakthrough was, to the extent that you can call it a breakthrough, was in 2018-19. I think that was probably at the time when the authorities on Garda Síochána were at their lowest guard with regards to the far right. They were always fixated on the left and on republicanism. They just didn't have their eye on the far right and on the harms being done. They weren't listening to minority ethnic communities. And I think that it was there was the kind of the perfect storm of the kind of the Brexit wave, in the Anglosphere and on the internet, the post-Trump wave, and when social media platforms were at their slackest as well, with regards to responding to the far right, and it was the arrival in Ireland of some figures from the North American white supremacist movement, which provided a catalyst for actions in Ruski and Mobile, and I think that was, and you know, as well, you had Peter Casey, the presidential candidate, who saw that he could, you know, emulate Trump and gain some political leverage by spouting some really hateful anti-traveler rhetoric. And so all of this sort of created a perfect storm. And you had then the arson attacks in Mobile and in Ruski. And I think that was the kind of from the point of view of hateful violence, the highest point, the peak of that. I think very rapidly since then, some very capable actors in the anti-racist and anti-fascist community brought their tremendous skills to bear very quickly and coordinated people to put a stop to these. And I'd like to really sort of tip a hat to the people who eventually came to form the newly formed Far Right Observatory, but also internationally the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, emergent groups like European Network Against INAM, which is supported by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, different groups like Trademark, Belfast, the Communities Against Racism, EPCAR, you know, some very strong allies in Unite the Union, and there's groups like AFA Ireland, Lekela, The Beacon, and so on. All of these groups have done a tremendous job in not just monitoring the far right, but disrupting them, stopping the fundraising events to the extent that they can here. I suppose the extent that the far right are still, the success that they still do have, I think has nothing to do with the traction that they have in the community, because they haven't been able to make an electoral breakthrough. None of them have even been able to retain their electoral deposits. I mean, it's been a resolute failure for them. They have no traction. But all of them have got overseas resourcing in some form or another. So the Irish Freedom Party is a Faragist astroturf in Ireland. It's, you know, its leader Herman Kelly is Nigel Farage's former aide. You know, the ideas, the messaging, the platform itself, you know, appear to have been resourced by the British right. You know, other actors have got, you know, connections to Ulster loyalism and the far right. You know, another one video vlogger is himself an ex-British Army soldier with links to Ulster loyalism. I mean, they're discredited. I suppose the only other player is the National Party, which you know, which uses the same graphics as the South African National Party, the apartheid era South African National Party, yeah. has links to Italian and German neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups going back 30 years. Its leader does. And they came out of the rump of the anti-abortion kind of ultra-Catholic scene. You know, none of these have got much traction, but because they have resources and because they're able to utilize the internet, social media platform, and chat rooms such as Reddit and so on, they have a disproportionate influence. I guess also there's an interest in them. Yeah. From overseas, from the US and the UK, because they have, because we're English speaking and they can put resources behind them. But just to say, sorry, I've been going on.
I mean, that's mapping out where we are in terms of what organization there is there, or organizations and their international links. And I suppose to flag up for the audience that groups like the Far Right Observatory provide excellent information. Leaving aside that issue of the kind of organized racist groups that exist and that we sometimes see on our television screens and such, I'm also interested, and this is a question that also applies in terms of gendered violence. I'm also interested in what the kind of casual racism that people face, because I think it's very true that, you know, as white European males, we just don't experience it and don't really understand it. We've got no idea, just as we've very little idea of what happens with women and girls and such. Nedson, I'm just wondering for you, for instance, when I walk down the street in Dublin, when you walk down the street in Dublin, what are the differences in experience? And has that got worse, or has it maybe improved somewhat?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the thing is, there are of course stark differences because there are a lot of experiences that only a few people observe and only a few people can actually relate to. And the thing about measuring if it has gotten worse or if it has gotten better is we also have to keep in context the phenomenon of underreporting, right? So for example, I might have an experience and I might be in a position to go and report it, either with the iReport or not with iReport, but then there are also a lot of people out there that may go through the similar experience, that may go through abuse, that may go through like maybe casual racism or even plain out like institutional racism that they might go through, but they might not actually report it. So it's always important when you're looking at issues like this to look at, for example, power relations, what may make people not report and what will make people report. So in a nutshell, I would say that if you're going to look at trends and experiences, it would be really hard to tell the actual dynamic, whether it's rising or it's falling, because it does depend on how much people are reporting. And it is in some instances when we have a lot of cases, it may just be that, okay, people are more aware that these reporting mechanisms might be there. So I think it might be good that we're saying, okay, these people are reporting it, but not necessarily it might mean that the cases themselves are maybe either falling or rising. So you have to keep that in context as well. But from a personal experience throughout the years and with discussions that I'm having with people, it's that while, for example, if you look at the context of like the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the protests that happened after the George Floyd matter, like people had hope after those periods that, okay, maybe something is happening to address racism in Ireland. But the general outlook is that people still don't understand what it is. People don't, although some people might understand what maybe, okay, what abuse might be like, what racially motivated abuse may be like, but some people still don't understand what institutional racism is. And I think that's why it's important for platforms like INAR to have those information sessions to actually push the discussion and let people know that, okay, you know what, these are the cases that are there. This is institutional racism, this is personal racism, this is systemic racism, and I think those discussions are really important. So sorry that I kind of went here and there with that, but just wanted to provide a bit more context to the discussion.
No, and I mean, when we're talking about the discussions that need to happen, I mean, there's been a lot of soul searching, obviously, in Ireland in the last couple of weeks about how we need to look at various types of violence that are visited upon the people who live here. And I'm just wondering, is there learning across in terms of what might be done in terms of gendered violence and what's happening with racist incidents? I guess also to put this as an open question to MariaElena or to Patricia, and for instance, is there work being done at the moment, anti-racist work within schools that involves yourselves or other organisations? And in what way could those discussions be brought forward if they are happening? I'll leave it open to either which one of you.
I'll let you go first, Patricia, because I can see you're going to hop out of your chair if you don't have your say. And I'll come back to my
Absolutely. Thank you, MariaElena. I think that yes, with what has been happening, you know, with the start of the pandemic and still ongoing, there has been a little bit of work around, you know, conversations on racism, how to combat racism in different levels of society. But, you know, personally, speaking as an ethnic minority in Ireland, and lot that could be done in terms of moving the discussions about racism and gendered violence in actually putting in place, you know, legislative measures and also putting in place policy initiatives that actually help in terms of combating racism. I think, you know, Ireland has a long way to go in terms of really, you know, taking the discussions further. If you look at, you know, I was recently a student at University College Dublin. When I got there, I really didn't feel like, you know, there are platforms where we could yeah, you experience racism, you know, from microaggressions to really blatant, you know, racism in different shops. I remember my first experience of going into a supermarket here in Africa, you know, somebody called me a monkey, but I had no idea, you know, where to go, how to discuss, in these issues, where to report. And it has happened, you know, every other day. I mean, I'm never going to change. I'm always going to continue to experience, you know, racism and discrimination because of the color of my skin, and also because I happen to be a woman. So I think that Ireland needs to, you know, put more effort, and they needs to go beyond just the different conversations about racism or just limiting it to interpersonal experiences, because, you know, the legacy of racism is complex. It's deeply, you know, personal, it's ugly, but it goes beyond just our interpersonal. Irish government needs to acknowledge that it's no longer about, you know, somebody calling me a monkey. It's about the systemic system that is in place that is designed to exclude other people, you know, and benefit, you know. So I think we need to go beyond that, and also just in general to put in place policies that protect women. I mean, just recently we're talking about the murder, you know, and in the 21st century, women are not safe anywhere. We are not safe to walk the streets. You can't go for a run, you can't go for a jog, you can't come back from a late night evening with your co-workers and still feel safe. So I think that we need to do more as a community. I think that as a society, we need to do more. Minority, you know, ethnic minority people are facing for a system that was designed to exclude them. So absolutely.
I'm going to just jump in here and just jump in and tell you about the wonderful work of my colleague Patricia, who is conducting she's conducted a series of consultations through the community, and she's preparing a shadow report for the National Action Plan Against Racism. And, you know, some of the work that she's come up with, like we were in a session with Roma women, that was allowing us to really investigate that kind of intersectionality. What happens to Roma women isn't the same experience, even as the experience that traveller women would face as women of African descent. So kind of getting to some of that discussion, looking at what we sometimes call microaggressions, and then thinking about some of the things that have happened to those communities that further marginalize them, and then making the links between policy changes and action that the state needs to take to legislate, to protect our community. That's been extremely interesting stuff. And so, yeah, I'd like to say that the NAPAR consultations have really kind of given us a really good grounding using our members who have told us about what's on the ground.
Thanks for that. And where you're explaining some of the amazing work that Patricia's been doing, maybe you could tell us something about your own work, and maybe Nedson, also following on, could tell us something about your work. So do you want to start, MariaElena, if that's okay?
Happily. I'm supposed to put together a training program that actually brings minority ethnic leaders together. And so, you know, actually doing work around consultation around NAPAR has been a really good way of actually meeting many potential minority ethnic leaders and finding out what some of the issues are. So I'm going into communities, talking to communities about some of the issues, and then the idea behind it is to actually create those advocates, those self-advocates. It's actually based, I think my practice is based on the community development approach that we've used, that has been used with, say, the traveller community, that approach where peer workers are trained and empowered to become activists who can self-advocate, identify the problems for themselves, and identify what solutions are needed. And so, yeah, that's in a nutshell my work. The next 3 years will be spent, you know, developing that community and developing that leadership voice, ability to not just identify racist incidents, but to actually bring about structural change.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nedson.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the network and communications officer, so which means I'm almost involved in every piece of the work, trying to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing, trying to make sure that we access the people that we need to access, trying to make sure that the people that these programs are designed for are actually aware that the programs exist for them. So if I was to put it in a nutshell of what was a little bit of a broad area, I would say a huge chunk of my work is communicating to people from minoritized backgrounds, trying to ensure that they are aware of the programs that we have in place, trying to ensure that we are acknowledging their scenarios and trying to get experiences from them, trying to ensure that we are actually bringing to light experiences of people that have been subject to injustices. So we do this by promoting the iReport system, which I think my colleagues have adequately mentioned how it works and what we do with that. Ensuring that they are aware of the program that we are implementing, and they're aware of the advocacy, what they were doing and things like that, and also engaging with the members of our networks. And a crucial part, another part that we also do is that I also communicate these experiences. So trying to bring it back to what we were discussing earlier, not only do we need these experiences of racism, as Patricia mentioned, not only do we need to bring this forward and to counter the narrative of the far right that, you know what, racism is not here, this thing is being blown out of proportion. Not only do we need these experiences to bring that forward, but we also need it to serve as a platform, or as data to counter the formal channels, so that we can use it to lobby for policies. Like, for example, now we have our Love Not Hate campaign, where we are saying that, you know what, these are experiences that people face and they are discriminated against. These are the problems that people face. Can the government implement and enact a hate crime legislation where we actually send out a clear message that, you know what, we do not tolerate racism in this country and things like that. So roughly, if I was to sum it up, I would say I coordinate the communications both from the minoritized backgrounds, the people who are going through all of this, to the public, and as well as ensuring that these experiences can be packaged and we can advocate to make sure that people are safe, and the victims that are faced with systemic injustices are able to find solace and we're able to build a world that's better for everybody.
Okay. Before I'm going to go back to Shane for a minute, but before I do, just to encourage people that have joined us, maybe at this stage, to submit any questions you have into the chat box, and we'll raise those issues. Shane, just do you want to sum up of some of what you've heard from your colleagues and around that, and then we'll see where we are with the chat box and any questions there are.
Well, really, I mean, I just want to say how proud I feel of my colleagues. I'm extremely proud. So my three colleagues are relatively new to INAR. We've had a staff changeover last year, so I'm in awe of their expertise, and I learn from them all every day. And I say that isn't a platitude. I say that without exaggeration. So MariaElena and I are former colleagues in a traveler development project over 10 years ago where we worked together, and I'm very excited to be working with her again, and her expertise and her approach to communities and her instinctive understanding of people's needs, and always asking the difficult question, always asking the awkward question, which I'm very, very grateful for. Patricia as well is a formidable human rights activist and a meticulous legal brain with a exceptional capacity to capture detail and to remember very important things, and that's proven so effective in her consultations on a shadow national action plan against racism, which is really crucial for us to address the systemic dimensions of racism, not just the manifestations in hate crime and discriminatory incidents. But Patricia is really doing work going to the heart of the levers of power and the policies and the gaps and the defaults which lead to racist outcomes. So it's really tremendous work that she's doing, and she's bringing, of course, her perspective not just as a legal expert, but as somebody from the global south who is who cut her teeth on gendered violence in Southern Africa, and in taking in taking strategic cases through the court system. So I really, I mean, I stand in awe of Patricia and her, and then Nedson, again, amazing, with amazing analysis, also from the Global South, and with a perspective on economics, on the history of empire, on the the historical dimensions which reproduce themselves again and again with racist outcomes, and the global and economistic dimensions of inequality, oppression, and racism. Again, like tremendous. And also, I think Nedson's Nedson's gender politics and his feminism, for a man, have to be congratulated too. It's just something. I mean, it goes without saying that MariaElena and Patricia's gender politics are second to none. But it's just great. From my three colleagues, I learned so much, and we're very excited. We're just at the beginning of a journey together as a team, and in really growing our practice. Again, so it's nice for me to be with former colleagues from whom I've learned a lot. I'm here with new colleagues who are teaching me more every day. So we're just very excited to be, part of this journey.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, before going to questions, I think we could probably add that you've done a fairly good job yourself, Shane. So, Ciara, are there any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple. So our first question is for the panel. So this is asking about what does it mean for people as individuals when they have this outlet to report the racism that they're experiencing? So what does it mean for people as individuals when they report the racism that they're experiencing? I think they're talking about how does it feel for people, rather than, obviously it's very important that that's recorded, but what does it mean for them personally?
Maria, you've got, cool.
I'll just give you a tiny example before I hand over. I would say in the case of the Roma women that we were talking to the other day, the ability to actually voice that whatever happened is incredibly powerful. When you're in the middle of an incident, you're so shocked, you can't believe the injustice that's actually happening to you at the time. And the ability to report it, to have somebody listen to you, and for a while to be thought of as, to actually become, because many Roma women, I think, are invisibilized, the racism that they face, the discrimination that they face. And again, the same for other women, whether you're a person of African descent or if you're South Asian or East Asian. You don't get to speak out, you don't get to explain to people about how that made you feel. So the I report is incredibly important about in capturing that individual racism and that microaggression. What I do think is really important, though, is that we actually do talk to communities again about how we do bring them together and how we start to advocate for change there. So it becomes less about that person's individual experience and then more about creating that change and that civil society change.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at the time. I'm just thinking, do you have other questions, Ciara? Yeah, go ahead.
The other question is, oh, they've deleted them. Well, I think what does it mean? Is there a difference between the racism that's happening in Ireland versus the racism that's happening in the UK? What's the relationship with Ireland being a former colony and how there's a denial about racism in Ireland?
Patricia or Nedson, either of you like to take that on?
Yeah, sorry, do you mind just repeating the question? Because I think I missed the last bit. The difference between racism in Ireland and
they're asking about is there a difference between racism in Ireland and the UK, and what's the link with denial of racism, about the reality of racism in Ireland, where Ireland was a former colony. I think how, you know, people say, well, sure, we can't be racist. We were a former colony.
Oh, okay. All right. That's actually a really good question. It's actually it's one of those important things that you really need to discuss, because obviously the history of Ireland is different, right? Because it was also a formalized, it was also a previously colonized country. So in a sense, there was a period in time where they were also racialized, right? So you can look at that history as well. So because they have experienced that, shift, and they have experienced that oppression, sometimes you tend to engage with individuals that are, oh yeah, we cannot be racist. But it is important to contextualize that, to the point that when you're looking at it, when you're looking at the contemporary scenario to an individual who's coming here and you're being minoritized, you're looking at it while in the context where the Irish, or the people in Ireland themselves, do bear the benefits of white supremacy and white power in terms of that, because they also, even though they were subjugated at that point and period in time, but the power relations that they do have with minoritized communities in here is different in that sense, in terms of the power that they have, because obviously now they are effectively benefiting from their white privilege that's there. So it is true that there are these discussions, but it is important that we do understand that they are reaping these benefits. While for somebody like me who has studied the history and and really likes to look at things in a historical context, I would expect people from Ireland to understand it better, at least because they have gone through that whole process of being racialized and have undergone systemic oppression in different forms of life. So that is the only, I can say, confusing bit where we're like, okay, you should try to understand this better, because you have understood this, you have understood this process, but then in the sense what you get in the end is denial. So yeah, there is that disconnect.
I suspect we could have an entire session on the whole issue of colonization and how the Irish view the rest of the world. I suppose from the purpose of accuracy, we might say that the 26 counties is a former colony. I'm not sure if it's really accurate to say that Ireland is a former colony, since we still live in part of it where we don't control our own future. Are there any more questions? We're slowly quickly running out of time. We could probably take another question. No, that's fine. The other thing that was raised with us after we'd organized this event, actually by Kira, was that it would be very interesting to do a similar event, but on a north-south basis, and to compare those experiences and what are the experiences of people here in the north and in the Republic. Again, because I think that a lot of people would like to pretend that a lot of racism in the north comes from loyalist paramilitaries and attacks and so on, and recent attacks in Belfast, but that's probably absolutely not true. It's probably much more widespread, and there's questions that we all need to face. So maybe we can revisit that later this year. I think it would be really interesting, and I think the last point that was just brought up, it would be fascinating to draw that out more, and to do that, and to maybe organise something with the Northwest Migrants Forum and with other groups in Belfast and with your good selves and others. For my part, I found this absolutely fascinating. I really deeply appreciate that you were all able to join us, although I'm still angry about what's happened in Nedson, and that we will right that wrong. You will come to Derry. We'll walk around Derry with you, take you to the museum, and take you down to Buncrana for a walk on the beach and a pint. Without further ado, many thanks to all of you and to the people who helped pull this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira and Paul, and everybody who helped to organize this. It was a real pleasure. Yeah, really, thanks very much. And a great idea to continue the conversation with our colleagues from anti-racism organizations north of the border. Talk about racism north and south, and the border itself as an instrument of racialization. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.